Yeah, this is a big one. This is a great win. This is one we definitely had circled on our calendar. So we're gonna enjoy this one tonight. But there's definitely room for improvement as a team. Offensively, we had too many penalties, and we had too much for low at the end of the game. Our defense definitely carried us, so we can't have that in the future. This isn't our ultimate goal was win this game. We still have a lot to improve on.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Trinity League Football Podcast. I'm Dan Albano with the Orange County Register and OC Varsity, and I'm joined by our insider, Scotty Barajas, as we record our show on October 28th, 2019, diving deep into the toughest league in America, the Trinity League. That's right, Scotty and I are back in your football life 3 days after the epic showdown between the number 1 team and the number 2 ranked team in the country, Mater Dei Bosco. They were the game of the night, game of the week nationally last week, and all eyes were on Bellflower and St. John Bosco. Scotty and I were both there. And how you doing this evening, Scott? After that big epic showdown, what we took in at St. John Bosco.
I'm good, Dan. I'm just taking it all in. Like you said, 3 days after that game, and when it had a feeling of a championship game, it didn't have the feeling of a regular season game. As far as the other games go that we saw, or they were pretty interesting too. There was one that you took in, and then there was the other game on Friday night that had an interesting score that we'll get to.
Yeah, exactly. Scotty talking about that Servite game, which was more competitive than than the score indicated. 27-0 over Santa Margarita. We'll get into that one for sure. And then that interesting score, as Scotty said, 19-0 J. Sarah over Orange Lutheran. But I want to welcome back all our football fans to the Trinity League Football Podcast. Scotty, we're moving toward Week 10 of the regular season, and it's the last regular round coming up in the Trinity League for 2019. So things are starting to wind down, and but of course there's so much to discuss after Mater Dei St. John Bosco. There was a lot of talking points in that game, from Bryce Young's play, DJ's play, all those penalties, some critical turnovers, a convincing start by Mater Dei, fireworks, pyrotechnics. There was a lot going on in that game. Great crowd. And then that opening voice was one of those players we just mentioned. Bryce Young was our opening voice to the show on the Trinity League Football Podcast. And we're going to end the show with some sound from Bruce Rawlinson, the Mater Dei coach. And before we'll cap one of our reports on the Mater Dei Bosco game was hearing from Cody Epps. But let's go back there, Scotty. Just 3 days ago, start our review with the Mater Dei St. John Bosco game. I know you have a lot to say on this, and Scotty Barajas has broken this game down like no other, but it was a 38-24 victory for the Monarchs. They moved to 9-0, 4-0 in the Trinity League, clinch at least a share of the Trinity League title. St. John Bosco, they're 8-1 overall, 3-1 in the league. Both these teams, they're going to Division I. We know that. Mater Dei probably sewed up that number 1 seed for Division I. That was significant as well. Bosco's going to probably be the number 2 seed. Those seedings, by the way, will be out this coming Sunday, probably before noon, as far as that bracket, who's in Division I. So some of the notables from this game, it was some pretty big stats. DJ and Bryce definitely played well, but Bryce Young, the Alabama committed senior, probably got the best of the matchup against his Clemson committed rival, DJ. But Bryce Young threw for 256 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also ran for 2 touchdowns, but he had a co-starring leading man on offense. And that was Cody Epps, 11 catches, 173 yards, 3 touchdowns, including a 50-yarder early in the game. And he was pretty much unstoppable. Bosco had no answer for him. And then for Bosco, DJ played well. 312 yards, 2 touchdowns. Did have an interception that was pretty big. But, late in the game, pressing the action, trying to bring his team back. Not going to really fault him too much for that. It was a nice play on defense. I'm sure Scotty will touch upon that. But the other key number I'll pass along. I think a lot of the numbers were similar. You start looking about total yards. You look at passing completions attempts. One number was significant was turnovers. Mater Dei had no turnovers. Bosco had 3. And it wasn't that these turnovers really got turned into points. I think only one of them got turned into a field goal. But it was lost opportunities for Bosco. That loomed, and that really loomed big because Mater Dei got off to such a great start, and that was a big part of this game. Scored on their first 3 possessions. They're up 21-3. They were really in control. Bosco started flat. Mater Dei started fast, and that was critical. And then as Bosco tried to make these comebacks, their comeback late in the game, it was just time ran out on them. And of course, the penalties, really did probably slow down some of the damage that Mater Dei could do. And that's how we got to that final of 38-24. So, Scotty, I know you took it in. You were on the sidelines for a hard-hitting game and a tense game. The crowd was in it doing their tomahawk chop. The Monarchs faithful was really supportive, not happy with the refs. They tried to support their team as much as they could. But at the end of the day, it was Mater Dei showing up in a big game like we've seen them this year. They have that swagger, that confidence. I wouldn't say they were overly, outwardly overconfident like that. They were poised. They came in. They took care of business. Bosco looked like they hadn't been in that kind of game despite the big, grand entrance with the pyrotechnics that I mentioned as they ran out to the field. That's what I saw. Those are a couple of my observations. But what's your take on this game, Scotty?
So, yeah, you said it pretty much. You gave a good synopsis there, too. So I'm going to follow up on that, and say, this one, did this one live up all to the pregame, I guess hype or, what everybody expected? It certainly had the feeling of a CIF championship game, especially with that pregame offensive starting lineups by Fox. That was kind of interesting. I've never seen that for a regular season game. Then, as you mentioned, the field pyrotechnics and that slick Bosco video, the entrance, and then, combine that with that sellout crowd, which I think Bosco did a great job with that because they're, nobody knew what to expect, and it wasn't as crazy as it sounded. There was a lot of Mater Dei people, more than I thought initially. Yeah. So everything seemed to work out in that aspect. But it probably is apparent that these two teams will most likely see each other, again in another 4 or 5 weeks. But Mater Dei had this one in control most of the game. But it was also a game marred with, momentum changes, some caused by the play on the field and some by the refs. And that's been a topic of discussion. There's been a lot of chatter across the social media about the refs on this game. But, it was more, it was Mater Dei who jumped out on front early on Bosco, scoring TDs on their first 3 possessions. And that was key. They built that 2-3 score lead. Bryce found Cody Epps early and often during that, 21-point run, included that 50-yard touchdown on that initial drive. And Bryce looked good. He slid away from he knew the pressure was coming. He kind of slid away from Court Williams and just nailed Cody right on that nice slant. Then that Mater Dei defense got after DJ pretty early, and they held Bosco to 3 points on their first 4 possessions. But then with the score 21-3, Mater Dei had Bosco on the ropes, in a third and, actually it was a second and 27, and then the dumbness kind of set in. Mater Dei gets that unsportsmanlike penalty, bailed Bosco out. They were on the hole. They moved the ball up to a 3rd and 2, and which was interesting. That play was interesting because later in the game, there was a similar barrage of taunting that was done on Bosco's side, and they didn't get the call. Mater Dei converts that 3rd down pass to Christian Dixon, and, the Bosco DB kind of stands to tackle and stands over Dixon. And usually in high school, that's a taunt, so they didn't get the flag or no call. So, going back to the other penalty Mater Dei gets assessed, and that momentum begins to slowly churn as Bosco starts getting a rhythm, and they start moving down the field. And then they were aided by another crazy roughing the passer on a 3rd down incomplete pass. Moses Cepolone hits and kind of wraps up DJ. DJ goes down, but it wasn't a viable takedown. It wasn't late for it for that matter either. And that kept the drive alive, and then DJ hits Lawyer for that 10-yard score on a 4th and 1, making it, 21-10 at the 8-minute mark. So then the next possession, Mater Dei looked like to be their way on, adding another score, but the drive was kind of set back by a sack by Jared Satelli. Then there was a holding penalty after Young scrambles 26 yards for that first down. Then that was followed up by a Matthew Jordan sack. And, that basically, so Bosco basically gets the ball back with 2 minutes left. Only to fumble the ball on the next play, after a completed pass. Bosco loses the receiver, got the ball kind of punched out. Mater Dei recovers at the Bosco 30-yard line, but then Bosco's defense made another red zone stand. They had a few of them this game. They held Mater Dei to 3 points going into the half. And then that second half seemed to be more tight, as each team scored 14 points with each defenses, making those tough stops. And, looked like Mater Dei was going to run away again as they marched down the field. Bryce hit Cody Epps, on the run as he was flushed out of the pocket for that nice 5-yard touchdown. Then Bosco counters on their next possession, takes a 6-play drive, capped by Rashad Luke's 35-yard touchdown run. Then Mater Dei counters back, set up by a 43-yard Marcise Jets run down to the Bosco 35-yard line. And then Mater Dei employs, a hurry-up offense and gets Bosco caught with 12 men on the field. But the refs wave the flag off. I mean, you get the idea. You see why it's created kind of chatter amongst people afterwards. But then came the makeup calls for Bosco as Bosco gets a defensive holding on a play where the Mater Dei receiver kind of stopped his route, but the DB kind of grabbed and held him. They caused that flag. Then 2 plays later, Bosco gets called for a ticky-tack PI. And then that next play, Bryce scores on that slick run where he certainly looked like he was about to get tackled, and he just makes cut back and slides in for that 10-yard score. Yeah. It makes it 38-17. Mater Dei with 4:09 left in the third. So remember that number, 4:09 left in the third.
Yeah.
Because on the next possession, Bosco takes a 4-minute drive all the way down to the 25-yard line to start the fourth quarter. And then 3 plays later, Bosco fumbles, and Rajon recovers for Mater Dei. But then Mater Dei goes 3 and out, and that next series, DJ's looks like he's about to get sacked, looks upfield, hits Chris Hudson for that 50-yard score, Bosco back within 14. So you can see how the momentum, those certain plays, change momentum back and forth. And it could be, could it be another momentum swing? Because Mater Dei answers back with the big play of their own on an 85-yard reception to Christian Dixon down to the 15-yard line, only to have it called back on a lineman downfield, which was questionable and horrible, especially after you're watching the replay, because the guy, he was not, they call it on time marks, and he was not, I've seen worse down the field. And then later on that same drive, this is where the Bosco taunting call I alluded to earlier was happened, and that wasn't called. And then so basically it was the momentum changer because Mater Dei, has to punt and gives the ball back. And that's where Bosco took the ball and drove it down the field, and they looked like they were going to score with a DJ quarterback sneak, but then that was called back for a holding as the running back, grabbed his arms around the Mater Dei, took Ray Telly down. Mater Dei holds Bosco to a 4th and goal. The DJ tries to hit Chris Hudson in that corner of the end zone, but Jalen Davies breaks up the pass. So Mater Dei gets the ball back. They try to run the clock out. They give back the ball to Bosco with 2 minutes, with 2 scores downs and no timeouts. But it's funny because this feeling on the field, even though they were 2 scores down, felt like this was like Bosco going for the win. It just had that sense of urgency with everybody in the stadium. But then Jalen Davies again sealed Bosco from getting that score as he picked off DJ for a second interception of the year. As DJ tried to hit Hudson on a quick out back shoulder, and Davies had perfect position to make the pick. And then Mater Dei went into the victory formation and ran the clock out. But Dan, even with Bosco battling back, and I'm going to allude back to that third quarter again, that 4:09, because it seemed as Mater Dei kind of took the gas off the pedal, especially after that long completion was called back, in the fourth quarter, because Bryce was only 4 of 7 for 20 yards in that fourth quarter. That's crazy stats for a Mater Dei offense. And, they didn't even attempt it. Everything was either short or then they ran, and Mater Dei, didn't score for the first time in a quarter of play this year.
Oh, wow. Good stat.
So, and this was an entertaining game minus the ref shenanigans, shoot, even when Mater Dei was lining up that last 2 minutes of the game, the refs nailed Mater Dei for a false start when nobody moved. So I don't know what that was. And when you look at on the replay, nobody moved, nobody rocked. So right there, that just kind of summed up the refs' night for them on that night. And this was probably the first time that a Mater Dei Bosco game was played with inconsistent calls. Because, every time they played, it's been a good game, at least from the ref standpoint. But anyhow, you look at, back to, to who showed out that night, besides Young and Epps, Marcic ran hard, probably the best I've seen him run all year.
I know.
He had that 96 yards rushing, and then defensively, Rajon, had a quiet 7 tackles, sack, 2.5 tackles for loss. And then Ryan had 6 tackles, a sack, and then 2 tackles for loss. And he got after the quick start because he's the one that started all the pressure in that first half and that first series for Mater Dei. And then Jalen Davies, what can you say, making those 2 huge plays to stop Bosco scores. And then on Bosco's side, McDuffie and Jody McDuffie and Logan Loya had most of the offensive production. Loya had 7 catches for 118, the touchdown, and McDuffie 5 for 104. And those turnovers, yes, did hurt them, and that was pretty much the difference. And then, for my players of the week, I went with Cody Epps and Bryce, because Bryce had those checkoffs. I think, I heard somewhere along the lines that he changed about 20 plays at the line of scrimmage. He did more than what his stat line showed. My honorable mention, I'm going with Jalen Davies for his key, bat downs and that interception, on the limited time that he was even targeted because, DJ didn't really throw it to Jalen's side until that very end.
Yeah.
And he made those plays while he was banged up too, as everybody kind of saw that he had that, leg injury or he was playing, hurt. And then for for Bosco's side, it got to be DJ. He kept them in that game. And then my honorable mention, I'm going to go with Chris Hudson, the defensive back, not the receiver, for his defensive play, because he made just about every play he was targeted on. He didn't give up any yards. I think when he played his heart out on defense.
Nice pick.
But yeah. So this, like I said, Dan. So this one, it would have. We all wish it would have been played a little bit cleaner. But it just shows you, what Mater Dei could do, and you wonder what they can do if they can play like a totally clean game. But it'll be interesting. I know everyone's going to talk about that next time around, but both the teams got to get there, and until then, we can just savor this one. So
it'll be interesting. It's thinking of just a bigger picture. This was the national game. Game of the regular season. Top 2 ranked teams in the country. People are tuning in and they're seeing so many penalties and mistakes highlighted. I don't know if that's really it's not the greatest look for just eyeballs, checking out this game, and they're like, oh, Mater Dei, number 1 in the nation. Man, they sure do get called for a lot of penalties. How many did they get called for? Final numbers, 16 penalties for 150 yards. Bosco got called for 8 for 72. So, like I've said earlier in podcasts, I know Mater Dei can play better. They show a lot of great discipline in how they take care of the ball. As far as they don't fumble, they don't have turnovers. Obviously, Bryce Young makes great decisions and doesn't really get into very much trouble. He's not going to, so the turnovers, I don't know where the turnovers are going to come from when you're playing against Mater Dei. It's going to be very difficult to get turnovers unless you somehow get an interception. They seem to hold on to the Monarchs seem to hold on to the ball well, but the penalties definitely took some air out of the game. So did the Bosco start. I didn't think that they didn't come out as aggressively as I would have liked them to do. Where you got that great arm from DJ, you got really good receivers. Let's come. I think they come out more aggressively, get that air attack going right away. First play from scrimmage, I think, was a run that got stuffed. Second play for scrimmage was a sack. And that was a 3-and-out. And it just, this is not the kind of start that Bosco needed. You can't fall behind on a team as explosive and ready to go as Mater Dei. I would have liked to seen, some play action early on. I mean, if they're worried about protecting DJ, okay, let's put a running back in motion. Let's clear out. Let's get, whatever your best play for DJ that he's going to be throwing a quick slant, quick out. We're going to get, let's get this thing fired up. And I just felt like they came out passively. And I think they kind of did the same thing against Servite. The first play they came back in that game, I remember DJ dropbacks, sacked. And you just can't start that way. And I think the good teams figure out ways to, get that opening possession and get that opening drive going. You have capabilities. Do you have any thoughts on these first drives? They don't look good for Bosco, and they play when they have more urgency. They start moving it better, but I didn't like their first drive.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that was the key to the game because they basically were, they were trailing the whole time. They were playing catch up, and it was that, like I said, that 14 point, to what actually almost 21, basically. They cut it down to 14, but they just couldn't. They ran out of time, and that's why I said it was interesting with that second half of Mater Dei because it was a combination of both, and I think combination of both Bosco's defense and Mater Dei taking that foot off the pedal because I just it's just astonishing that Bryce could only be that 4 of 7 for that 20 yards but it'll be I don't think you want to come out of this game and start no one wants it to be a slow start, especially against a team like Mater Dei, and that was pretty much the difference right there. And then kind of just tailing back end of your deal about the playoff penalties. There was a quote if everyone Rollo at halftime. And he says, I don't want to take away from their aggressiveness and tenacity, and so people keep asking about, why are they so disciplined? And I don't think, I think that's Mater Dei's philosophy. I think he doesn't like the personal fouls, and he can understand when you get the others, but he doesn't, and I know, it's either personal foul or pass interference. Those seem to be the ones that have been, hindering them or seem to be called the most, they don't get that, they got a few holdings, and they got the other ones that I mentioned that were, suspect, but if you take the ones that are suspect, it's a little bit, it changes things a bit. But as far as, his going aggressiveness and tenacity, there's your answer right there. Because I just think that he wants him to play smart. I think he just wants to, he doesn't want the bonehead dumb stuff. But as far as he still wants him to play aggressive, and I think that's sometimes it's hard to when you're and like we said both teams we get these over aggressive teams and sometimes it gets a little bit out of hand. But if you just walk away and just let your field do the talking, you should be fine. So
well, it'll be interesting to see where Mater Dei goes for this way this in this regard with the penalties. I mean, it was mentioned. My colleague Steve Fryer wrote a preview of the game and mentioned about the keys to the game, mentioned penalties. We know that there was a ton of penalties on Mater Dei against in the Servite game. There were times earlier this year that we thought they were doing better. I think they're capable of it. One telling stat was of the 16 penalties that Mater Dei had on Friday night, 10 of them were in the first half. So most of them came in the first half, and they were able to cut it down. So for Mater Dei, they have to play cleaner from the very beginning. And some of that, I think, probably works with the officials. You show them right away, how you're playing, and maybe they're not watching you so closely. I don't know, but they can cut it down. It'll be interesting if they do, though, because they had 16 penalties and still won 38-24. But maybe they'll listen to the Trinity League Football podcast and get those stats, like you said, Scotty. They didn't score. Monarchs didn't score for the last 16 minutes and 9 seconds, and Bryce did. And they didn't score in the fourth quarter. So you would think that these things get mentioned to the Monarchs. And they said it overall. The players said it. They still have things to work on. Bryce, we said, heard that from Bryce opening the show. They know they have things to work on, so it does give them things to work on. And a couple things on defensively I want to touch on with you, Scotty. Did you say that? Did you think Rajon was quiet? Because I thought he was really good. And I think he's kind of he's kind of terrorizing the Bosco. I feel like.
No, you're right. I say quiet, and I guess I'm alluding to Greg Biggins. He made that comment in his broadcast on one of his sacks, but I was just like, interesting. So I don't know why I said, I guess he by far he was their leading tackler on the night.
Yeah,
and it's true he's played big on these in these big games versus Bosco.
Yeah,
so,
I thought he's been good in that. And then thing about Hudson, a great insight from yourself. You're recognizing him for his defense. So I guess obviously Hudson was not on Cody Epps because nobody who covered Cody Epps very much stopped him the whole night. Who did he mostly match up with?
He was mostly on the outside. So I can't. I think they target. I think that there was. The two times that I think they tried that he in the second half, I think Hudson went on Cody, and there was a deep ball thrown, and I think Chris made a play on it, and I think that was one that he broke up. I know there was another one he was on. Okay,
they did switch him. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how much. I'd have to go back. I didn't totally chart that one, but I do know that he made a play on Dixon, or I think it was on Kyron Hudson. That he made a play on, but I pretty much. I mean, if he did take, and they didn't attempt to throw it, he might have, taken him take away.
Okay.
So, but that was. I think there was also talk that I don't know. That's like this. He was going both ways, and people are saying he was gassed by having to go both ways. So
very difficult to do in this type of game, and we'll have to examine that closer and look at it because that could be. And we'll definitely get into that as we talk about, most likely do another podcast on the championship game. If that happens, football fans, be sure to join us back for another breakdown of these teams if they play again in the finals. But the breakdown on Cody Epps, he had 8 of those catches of 8 of 11 in the first half. So Bosco did better, but the damage was kind of done. At halftime, he had 8 for 148 yards and 2 touchdowns, including the big momentum, gaining 50-yard touchdown. So we'll see where this all plays out if and when these guys hook up again. So speaking of the one Cody Epps, number 4, who got a nice shout out from his coach Rollinson after the game, here's some comments from the senior wide receiver who's just having a breakout year.
I'm just happy to be with my brothers, all the people that I've come in contact with, all my teammates, all the time that I spent with them, all the time that I spent with my coaches. So last year, I was definitely distraught not being able to end the season with my teammates. But this year, I'm just having fun. I'm just playing ball and living life with my team.
All right, Scotty, well, let's move on to some other good games from last week and to review. I want to take us to Friday's game. As you mentioned, interesting score. Jay Sarah, 19, Orange Lutheran, 0. And there's been some interesting scores this year with the Lions, and it was an interesting halftime score once again. 19-0 final score. Well, how about 7-0 Jay Sarah at halftime? So interesting score. Jay Sarah, rebounded from their tough loss against Servite, and they rebounded by really keeping the ball out of the ground. They really took the ball out of the quarterback's hands. General Booty, Garrett Phillips, they only combined for 15 passes, 1 touchdown. So only threw 15 times. The Lions kept it on the ground 26 times, almost double. Chris Street, 14 carries, 68 yards, 1 touchdown. There was nothing too explosive in this game as far as long runs. The Lions' longest run, Chris Street had a 19-yarder. That was the longest run of the game. As we know, Sammy Green showed that burst and went for about 75 yards, touchdown against Servite. None of that in this particular game. So it was Jay Sarah, and that's we've been complimentary of their defense, and it definitely was outstanding in this game, getting the shutout. Keegan Netherton had about a 35, 40-yard interception return in the third quarter to really kind of seal the deal. That was a big play. And Jaden Genova played well. as well on defense. I think he was their leading tackler with about 10 tackles. But what did this game mean for Jay-Sara? They desperately needed it. They couldn't lose this game, even though I predicted that Orange Lutheran would shock the Trinity League and Orange County. That didn't happen. But funny enough, as I mentioned my prediction to Steve Fryer when we were at the Mater Dei Bosco game, he was like, "Really, you picked that?" Questioned me just like you did, Scotty. But my prediction didn't look too bad at halftime, 7-0. But Jay-Sara got the win it needed. They're 6-3 overall. They're 2-2 in the Trinity League, and yes, they're in that conversation for Division I. That's where they want to be. Hey, they're 6 again this week. They didn't drop at all. They saved their spot, and they're looking like they're Division I bound because they're playing Mater Dei. I can't imagine they get too hammered in the drop too much in the polls after losing the number 1 team in the country. So that's who they play this week. But we'll talk about that. But for Orange Lutheran, yeah, it drops them to 4-5 overall. The 1-3 in league. That one win over Santa Margarita, is huge for them. So and it looks like Lancer's headed to Division II. But what was your take on this interesting 19-0 score, Scotty?
Yeah, so I wasn't shocked at the outcome, but more so the score. As you alluded to, I think both teams left their offense on the bus. Both teams combined for 355 yards of total offense.
Yeah.
And Olu outgained the Lions 179 to 176. And, Olu was able to move the ball, but they just couldn't come away with points, and they won the time of possession, allowing Jay-Sara 2 first half offensive possessions. And Olu, had a red zone possession in each half, but turned the ball over on downs both times. The first one came at the 7:23 mark in the second quarter. Obviously the game was scoreless. Olu was at the 20-yard line, missing that scoring opportunity. When the Olu receiver caught what looked to be a score, but he just couldn't hold on to the ball, and he, in the end zone, and eventually they turned it over on downs. And then it wasn't until 29 seconds left till half that Jay-Sara's Garrett Phillips connected with the Kenyon Burnett for an 8-yard score.
Right.
And then Jay-Sara opened the second half with the Sammy Green touchdown kickoff return, but that was called back for a holding penalty. But then Jay-Sara was able to go on an 8-minute drive, punching it in 3 yards out by Chris Street. Missed an extra point, 13-0 Jay-Sara. Olu gets down to the 10-yard line again, first and goal, and ends up turning the ball over on downs. Olu then gets the ball back, only to have Keaton Netherington pick it off, taking it 40 yards for the pick six with the minute 57 left in the third. And, Jay-Sara, again, they had trouble with missed the extra point again. So it was, 19-0. And then there was no fourth quarter scoring. And, and then you had already kind of mentioned the stats. Here's the interesting, General Booty, actually, he started the game, but he was 2 of 6 for 5 yards. Garrett Phillips, 5 of 9 for the 49. And then you had mentioned, Streets, Sammy Green had 41 yards on 9 carries. And then over for Olu, I think they passed for 118 yards. I think they rushed for 61. Carson Conklin, I believe, started. I didn't see anything on Gonzalez, so I don't know if he just didn't play or if he was banged up. And then, my players of the game on this one, obviously it was a defensive game. Jaden Genova, again, led the way with 8 tackles. He had 2 for loss. I didn't have an honorable mention. My player of the game for Olu, I don't have the final stats on everybody, but again, their offensive numbers were down. So if I would have had, there's probably got to be a defensive guy, but I don't have the total numbers for them. So
yeah, and I went with Netherton for that pick 6. So he was my player of the game for Jay-Sara. So yeah, and we didn't see the Orange Lutheran stats posted on Max Prep. So. But, interesting where that passing game goes. I mean, is it for Jay-Sara? Is it going to get much better this week against Mater Dei? Probably not. So they'll go into the playoffs, and it's going to be tough for them to compete in Division I without that pass attack. Lions, like we said, they're 6 right now in Division I this week. They stick there. It looks like they'll probably play Centennial Corona in the first round. So, what do you think of that matchup? Because you've seen Centennial Corona, know them pretty well, Scotty. I haven't seen the Huskies this year, but just at first take, what do you think about J. Sarah Centennial?
I have a little bit of that in my preview. I kind of touched base on that, and I know we're going to get into that a little bit more. But J. Sarah is a reeling team right now.
They are,
and I don't think that they're worthy. I know they want to. Their head-to-head matchup is what's keeping them at 6 because Calabasas and Amon are above them. So,
2 teams they've beaten.
Yes, but I bet you if those 2 teams played today, they both would be J. Sarah. So I think that's just where J. Sarah's at this point. But that's just my take and how I've seen it. But that's why it's going to be interesting to see how because I just think that they're not playing like a number 6 seeded team.
Yeah.
And Centennial is playing really well. They're playing better than what they did at the start of the season. So that one I think could be an ugly game because the offense for Centennial and right now J. Sarah has no offense, and so that one could be a mismatch. So
yeah, I mean, it's how you're playing right now going into the playoffs. That's why I picked Orange Lutheran because I sense that I sense that J. Sarah is reeling and they're really not right on offense, and they're still not right. And I don't think they'll get right this week, right, against Mater Dei. And they beat Bishop Amat at home on September 6th, and they beat Calabasas on home on September 20th, and 31-20 at home. And it seems like ever since, and then they opened Trinity League game, the Lions did at home against Santa Margarita, 35-3, looking good. But then they fell so flat against Bosco, 49-10. And it's like ever since then, they just have not seemed right. And I think some of that I think it started troubling. I think it was one of the second halves. I think against Santa Margarita they slowed down, wasn't it, Scotty?
That game was the 7-0 first half.
That was first half. Yeah,
first half. Yeah. So and then they got a defensive score, a defensive score in that game. Same with the Servite game. Every game they seem to get either a special teams or a defensive score. So like I say, their offense is the numbers. You look at the points that they've scored, and it's always like I said. There's they have like an extra score in that doesn't come from the offense. So the numbers get kind of skewed when you look at the overall points. And
so maybe the red flags went up a little bit with the Santa Margarita opening start, but it finished okay. But then once you get in the Trinity League, it's going to be tough to count on those special teams or defensive scores because the teams are way better. Their teams are well coached. Everyone's more prepared. You might not get that. It can expose you a little bit more, and maybe that's what's happening. Scotty, and then on Thursday last week, a game I took in, it was Servite 27, Santa Margarita 0. This game was played at Veterans Stadium in Long Beach. Homecoming night for the Friars, and it was actually a closer game than the score indicated. It was 14-0 at halftime, and I think it was 14-0 going into the fourth quarter as well. But it was Servite really running the ball more than they have this season. Troy Thomas, the Friars coach, afterwards said that the Eagles were really dropping back 8 guys in the secondary to defend against Noah Fafita and all those Servite wide receivers and that pass attack. So it was Kyle Bandy who tied a season high for carries with 17 and definitely achieved his season high with 154 yards. He's a good-looking junior running back, runs real hard, breaks some tackles, can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's actually the younger brother of Michael Bandy, who's a star senior receiver at the University of San Diego, and he's a undersized 1AA player is one of the best 1AA players in the country. So Kyle's going to be an interesting guy. He's got this older brother that he looks up to. I really could see Kyle developing into an outstanding player for Servite. And the Friars ran for 3 touchdowns. 3 of their 4 touchdowns were rushing. They also got a great game from Noah Avenger, who had caught a 40-yard touchdown from Noah Fafita, and he also had an interception Bates also had an interception for Servite. So that was another key thing, is Servite picked off 2 passes and did a little bit better as far as in the turnover battle. And yeah, the interceptions really hurt Santa Margarita, and it wiped out some. They had some really promising drives. They also had a field goal blocked. And just to give you like Santa Margarita's night in a nutshell, is that they opened the second half with the ball, and they used up almost 11 minutes. It was about 10:50 drive. They ran it all the whole third quarter, and got down for a short field goal and got it blocked, and they got nothing, and they got shut out for the second game in a row. That's the kind of frustration thing it is, where they really kind of matched okay at the line of scrimmage with Servite. They ran the ball and they moved it all the way down the field, but they hurt themselves with interceptions at key times. One in the red zone, one around the 25, deep drive, and they're getting that field goal block. So they're young, inexperienced. They lost some players in transition, the coaching transition. Coach Visselmeyer was pretty upbeat afterwards, saw some potential. Thinks obviously there's things that they need to improve on. But he also said they played a lot of young guys, and they even played some freshmen in that game. So that was my takeaway, Scotty, that Servite showed a new way that they can win with the ground game. They got a good offensive line, by the way. They played good defense, kept their momentum, winning their third league game in a row. And Santa Margarita, kind of familiar problems, hoping for a turnaround, next season. So, but their season's not going to be over because they're going to go to Division II. So just to recap, Servite, they go to 6-3. They're 2-2 in league, and they're right in the middle of this Division I talk as well. They're again 5th in Division I right now. All signs point to a Mission Viejo Servite match in the first round of the playoffs in Division I. Santa Margarita, they're going to go to Division II, and I think they'll be a dangerous team because they can move the ball. They do have some abilities to hold on possession. They're playing okay defense, and they're well coached. They change up a lot of things. One thing I want, and one other Santa Margarita player I wanted to highlight real quick was Buckley. Their junior wide receiver had 6 catches for 35 yards. Also had 2 runs for 28 yards. Had some key third down, fourth down type plays. He was kind of their go-to guy, and I think he's an emerging player. I think he's pretty talented, and I was impressed with him. So, what was your take on this game, Scotty?
We wondered how Servite was going to respond after 3 intense weeks of emotional and physical football going against, Bosco, Mater Dei, and even that J. Sarah game at the time. Though Servite got the win, and it was relatively closer than the score indicated. The overall vibe on this one, to me, seemed that Servite didn't seem overly inspired and wanted to get this game over quick. They used their running game primarily for the first time, as you mentioned, with Bandy bursting, for consistent gains. He ran for 98 of his 154 yards in the second half. Though Servite's defense got the shutout, the Eagles didn't do themselves any favors with the 2 red zone turnovers and a drive that ate off 10 minutes off the clock, only to have the field goals blocked by Servite's Jack Kane.
Yes.
As you mentioned. The Servite, the Eagles actually had 212 yards of total offense, and they still managed to control time of possession and move the ball down the field, just couldn't get points. And then, they open the game, go down to the 10-yard line. Cole Fulton throws a bad cross across his body, into the hands of Noah Abinger. Servite fumbles on that next drive all the way down to the Eagle 15-yard line. Both of these teams eat the clock and the possession. Each team just had 1 possession in that first quarter. Servite came back, hit Noah Abinger on a 44-yard touchdown. And then it was 14-0. And then, like I said, it seemed the lack of urgency for Servite, because I think it was about 1:40 left to the half. And Servite had all 3 timeouts, and they don't call a timeout on Santa Margarita's 4th down plays. The Friars get the ball back with 55 seconds, run 1 play at half, and then go into halftime. So it was like it was for being in only, like I said, 14-0.
I noticed that.
So they wanted to get in, get out, and it was more apparent in the second half, like when they went to Bandy. I mean, I know Santa Margarita does run a weird defense because they did it with Mater Dei. They dropped a lot. I heard this too was against Mater Dei. They dropped like 8 guys back, so it makes it a little bit challenging more to hit the windows because they don't want to get beat deep. So, I think, like you said, and that was evident. Noah was the 9 of 15 for 160. And even T-Mac was hardly targeted. In fact, only once. And he didn't have any receptions. But and then, basically it was a Kyle Bandy show. He punched in, I think, the final score with the last 2 minutes of the game. Yeah. And make it that 27-0. But like I said, it was obvious to me that Servite's emotions were spent after going through that gauntlet. For the Eagles, their offensive woes continued, making those costly red zone turnovers, and, they were game-changing ones at that. But, bottom line is you got to protect the ball. Fulton was 11 of 23, 123, 2 picks, 47% completion. And I don't know if the Eagles are going to score any more points for the rest of the year.
Well, they're going to not in the Trinity League, right? They're going to score in the playoffs, right?
Well, I'm just saying the rest of the regular season, with Bosco coming up next week, because I can't recall any Trinity League team being scoreless for 3 straight games. Yeah. So. And my player of the week was Bandy. It was Kyle Bandy. Yeah. He did look impressive. He had a lot of burst. He seems to get. I've noticed he seems to get better each time, because I remember him last year, and I was like, this guy's a fullback. He's not really. And he's gotten a lot faster this year than he did last year. So it'll be interesting to see, how he progresses from here on out. And then my honorable mention, I went with Noah Avenger. Is probably the best of the game of the year for him. He's kind of been quiet, even though I know he has 3 picks. But that was probably his best performance, both sides of the ball. And my player of the week for Santa Margarita was Anthony Comstro. He had 9 tackles, on defense. And it just seems to be week after week we've gone with a different Eagle for player of the week, because they're racking up all those tackles. So. But that's what I got.
Yeah, and I did co-players game for Servite with Noah Avenger and Kyle Bandy, and I think that's a good point on Kyle Bandy. I think he is improving. I think he's a player on the rise. I agree with you that he seems to be getting better as the season's progressing. So, but I do think I wonder about his. It just gives Servite another option. I think they prefer to pass the ball. With Avenger, but depending on how their teams are playing them, I think they have a great option in Kyle Bandy. But, they do. I think the engine is Noah Avenger and, Zedekiah Centers and T-Mac McMillan. But I think, Servite's a little bit more dangerous when they can run it as well. And my player of the game was Michael Buckley. I didn't mention his first name initially. 5'11", 165 junior. Got a little scoot to him and some good hands, made some tough catches. And I know I know Cole Fulton didn't had some tough interceptions. I see a lot of potential in Colt. I think if once he's a junior, 6'4", 195, and I think he has a pretty good arm and makes some pretty nice throws. I just think I like to see him improve his running ability and trying to add some of that to his dimension, to his game. I think there were some times where, if he would have tried to run it instead of force it in there, I think there were some opportunities for him to do that, and just working on that decision making. But I think he has a lot of tools, and I like that Santa Margarita has given him some opportunities. He threw 24 times in the game, and I know the interceptions hurt him, but I think Colton Fulton's going to be pretty good still. As long as he works on that, decision making, the running ability, I think a lot of other things are there for him. So I think Santa Margarita's got their quarterback, and I think he's got some potential, just some more things to clean up. But I think he's an interesting prospect. Do you? I know you've seen Colt a time or two. Would you agree with me, Scotty?
I mean, yeah. Against the Mater Dei game, he actually eluded the rush better than I thought he would, because he stepped up in the pocket and then he sidestepped, got out of the pocket, rolled out. So he eluded a lot of pressure last week against Mater Dei that I was kind of surprised that surprised me. Yeah, you're right. He does have, the good arm. It's just those tangibles of, he's got to cut down those turnovers, when to force it, when not to throw it, where to throw, and that will hopefully come with experience. But, it hurts, quarterbacks when you don't have those athletes down the field. As we say for all these these passing teams. But like you said, he's got another year, so we'll just have to see where he goes from here.
There's that part of the question. So, well, thanks again for everyone for joining us on the Trinity League Football Podcast. And as we kind of get in the middle of the show, let me give a little housekeeping. I threw it out on my Twitter earlier today. I don't know if anybody saw it, but my Twitter handle is OC Varsity Guy, and I asked for some questions or comments if anybody had them on the podcast to please leave them. We didn't get any, but you can always leave me comments that you want us to address on Twitter if I throw out the mailbag offer. And then, of course, the best thing you can do for our podcast, give us a review, hopefully a positive review on our iTunes. We're available on iTunes and wherever you get your podcasts. The Apple Podcast, I should say. And leave us a review there. Leave a question. We've gotten a couple on there. Some comments from last one I saw was from an Orange Lutheran fan. So we appreciate your support or just sharing it with your diehard football fans as we're starting to wrap up our season. But we still got a lot of big games to talk about. Hey, Sky, so before we preview Week 10, final round of the Trinity League, what do you got for us on the lower levels?
So we'll start with the modern-day Bosco. That game is always a big game for those lower levels. And it was JV was 28-21 Bosco, and the freshman was 20-19 Modern Day. So they split on those two there. So it keeps Modern Day still undefeated, and that takes them into I believe next week's game with J. Sarah.
This week's game.
Championship, yeah. So I don't have any scores for Olu and J. Sarah. And then as far as the Servite Santa Margarita, it was JV 36-14 Servite. And then this was kind of an interesting one. Freshman score was 24-10 Santa Margarita. So they split on that one. So.
Yeah, I think Servite's JV's doing pretty well this year, right? I don't.
Correct. Yeah, they're pretty strong in their JV, but their freshman team has not been very good this year. So.
Right, and then this week's game, Modern Day freshman, J. Sarah freshman, could be pretty interesting, right?
Yes, and I would probably go to that one, but that one's on Halloween night, and it's at 4:00, and it's interesting. It's a 4:00 start, so that's going to frustrate people for their trick or treating, unless they decide to change that. I'm told that a lot of the Modern Day's done a lot of their games at 4:00, and people don't get out of there till about almost 8:00. So. Yeah. I don't think people, are going to have plans for their, Halloween, and that one may, disrupt that one, especially if J. Sarah is coming from J. Sarah. So stay tuned for that one. That one may change, but as of right now, it's a 4:00 start at Modern Day for the freshman game.
It's at Modern Day at 4?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, we'll keep and then, next week we'll definitely have a full, hopefully, final standings on the JV level, freshman level, and maybe we'll even have a couple names to share of guys to watch that maybe had good seasons. We'll keep working hard for all our football fans on the Trinity League Football Podcast. All right, Sky, so now to talk about the games this week. Week 10 of the regular season. Last week, here we go. So let's start. These games are all on Friday, November 1st. Let's go Servite taking on Orange Lutheran. This is games at Orange Coast College, 7 o'clock kickoff. So Servite needs to win this game to secure third place in the Trinity League, which would be quite a feat. At the beginning of the year, when we've been working since in August on this thing, Scotty, I think the initial, my initial thought, third place, that was J. Sarah's spot. That was, it wasn't going to be Servite this year. We thought they were maybe another year away. They win on Friday. They get third place. They go into Division I on it would be a 3-game win streak. Tons of momentum, and they're going to be back at Orange Coast College, where I think they've already played 2 great games this year. They almost beat Bosco at Orange Coast College, and they they defeated J-Sarah at Orange Coast College. Here they are against Orange Lutheran again. It's a pretty good rivalry between Servite and Orange Lutheran. Orange Lutheran wants to, obviously they got shut out last game as Scotty broke it down. They really struggled to finish. They'll probably try to maybe do some of the things that Santa Margarita did with their offense, keep the ball away from the high-powered Friars offensive attack. But I'm going to predict Servite's going to get the win. They're going to go 3-2, 7-3, and head into the D1 playoffs and take on a really tough and talented Mission Viejo team with that really great defense of, great defensive line, linebackers, secondary underrated. But that's for another show. But what do you think about this game, Scotty?
Yeah, for a minute, it was looking like Olu was going to possibly be back in the mix going into this Servite game, but that loss last week, showed there's more going on with the Lancers to make a legitimate run. It's apparent, their offense is, plagued by lack of consistency, and that's going to make it tough, to match scores with Servite this week. However, the Lancer defense has played inspired. They played tough, against J-Sarah, but just wasn't enough. Who's going to get the start this week, for Olu? Because I think last week it was all Carson Conklin, if I wasn't mistaken, because I didn't see anything on Gonzalez. Did they flip back? Because I know last week they were flipping, going back and forth. Yeah. I don't have any reports that he's injured. So, unless Servite plays uninspired and goes through the motions, I don't see, the Lancers making a run. The offense is just, it's going to have to score. With the exception of the Santa Margarita game, the Orange Lutheran starting offense has scored one touchdown in the Trinity League play. And they haven't scored in the last 8 quarters. Now, I'm talking starting offense. Yeah. So, they've scored some points, but it's been a mix of, seconds, or it's, been also against the other teams, second and third teams. So that's an interesting stat in itself.
Scotty Barajas breaking it down, as always. So, interesting thing to watch there. All right, Scotty. Now let's check in with those Bosco Braves. Coming off that bitter loss last week to their rival Mater Dei. They're back at home, and they're taking on Santa Margarita that has been shut out 2 consecutive games. What an interesting mindset this must be for Bosco. They were disappointed, but they got things to work on, but they're not going to really be tested by Santa Margarita. And it's a tough spot for the Eagles where they've been shut out 2 games in a row. They're going to be playing some more young kids, trying to scheme, trying to get better, build, work on some things of their own for, the Division II playoffs. The Eagles aren't done. They're going to be in the playoffs, and they're going to be playing the very next week. They're going to be part of a 16-team bracket. There's going to be no buys. If you're in Division I like Bosco, you're getting a bye next week. Same with probably Servite. Teams that are going to Division I, they get a bye because there's only 8 teams in the bracket. So what a mindset, what a contrast this game is. I'm wondering how Bosco's going to show up. I mean, obviously they have great leadership with Coach Negro. They have a lot of pride, and they know they have some things to work on. They're probably going to try to get that ground game going. They're going to try to, maybe strike early against a defense that's probably going to give them some good looks. Like you said, maybe does some different things, dropping in some coverage. But what do you think about this game, Scotty, which I think is going to be, a lopsided, Bosco win?
Yeah, it's a tall task, would be interesting to see how Bosco handles this one, knowing they have that extra week before the playoffs start. Do they rest guys? And same, what we said for the other games. Certainly there's nothing to prove unless they're going to take their frustrations out on the Eagles. Maybe they play everybody for a half. Like I said earlier, I think the Eagles, like we said, they're going to go into D1 to be due to playoffs, and like I said, possibly scoreless, if they can't get in the end zone against Bosco. That's something to look out for. But, I don't think there's, I don't know too many people who are going to be scoreboard watching this one. So,
well, speaking of scoreboard, I mean, the Cal Preps website has this game projection 60-0 St. John Bosco. So that would move them to 9-1 and 4-1 in league and get them that, they got to win this game. Obviously they're going to win it, and they're going to, secure the second seed in Division I. So, but it's the schedule just isn't too enticing to the Eagles here, or the Bosco. I don't think either of these teams are too thrilled about this game, but they got to get it done and finish it out. Last game of the night, on Friday, we're going to talk about, Scotty, Mater Dei back at Santa Ana Stadium against J. Sarah. Pretty good rivalry between these two teams. They get pretty spirited about it, but then you got Mater Dei. They're looking to go 10-0 in the regular season, and they want to get out of this game healthy. They're going to Division I. They're going to be number 1 seed. But, hey, we know J. Sarah does have some talent. It's been a quiet year for Chris Street. They still have, but they struggled mightily to pass the ball, so we know that could be a problem against a really good defense of Mater Dei, where you can't be one-dimensional. They're going to probably really stuff the run. It's going to be hard to run the ball, especially we know how strong Mater Dei's secondary is. There's going to be a pass rush. This is a brutal game. That matchup, J. Sarah's offense against the Mater Dei defense, I don't know how that's going to go. So maybe it'll be like Scotty Barajas was dialing up early. So J. Sarah's got to focus on special teams. They got to have to focus on defense, and they're pretty strong in both of those areas. But that's going to be asking a lot against the number 1 team in the country. I'm expecting Mater Dei to roll. I know it's a pretty good rivalry, but actually Mater Dei has been in control of it in recent times. So I'm expecting Mater Dei to roll pretty good. But I still think both these teams are going to Division I. But Mater Dei, they're going to number 1, I think, and I think J. Sarah's reeling. But what's your take on this game?
Yeah, so this one, had the makings of a great final week, to cap off Trinity League play. But, not so much now, at least from a media standpoint. I know there's been talk about, like you had mentioned, this is a pretty good rivalry. Bosco's the rivalry, Servite's been the rivalry. But I think these days, at least in the recent years, this one has become a mini rivalry.
Yeah.
And that, some people may know about it, some may not, but, this has been mentioned right here that, J. Sarah has 6 former Monarchs playing for them, and starting for them. And the offensive coordinator is the freshman coach, who is in his second stint as OC for the Lions. So nonetheless, this one will be interesting for that matter. Unlike last year, where J. Sarah was rolling, this team is rolling the other way. We've talked about their struggles that's been apparent, for back-to-back weeks. The offense could only score 2 offensive TDs, while their defense has played solid. And like I said before, I mentioned it, it's unfortunate because the Lions are the 6th ranked team in CIF, 5 in Orange County, but they don't reflect their ranking. And that's, tough because I think it's going to misrepresent that placement for the D1 playoffs. Do you rank a team there, for what they did in the past and how they're playing now? So it'll be, we'll get more into that later next week. I just wanted to kind of touch bases because we had talked about that earlier. It will be interesting to see what approach Mater Dei takes to this game. Do they get in, get out, not worry about making a statement, or do they keep the pedal down, not give anyone any room to say Mater Dei looks sluggish, Bosco just, is just rolling now, and, it was apparent some guys were playing kind of banged up in the Bosco game. So, even though, these teams get that extra week of rest, do you take the 2 weeks of rest now, or, feel one is enough? Regardless, though, I don't see J. Sarah be able to move the ball on Mater Dei's starting unit. The J. Sarah offense is averaging 16 points a game in Trinity League play. And then if you take away the Santa Margarita game, it drops to 12 points a game. So Mater Dei should get this, to a running clock if they play their game.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's what will happen. One thing, you watch at it, you just look at the Mater Dei right now. And, they have 2 really good running backs that are on the rise, I think. Yetz had he had a really good game. Again, he ran really hard. You mentioned him already against St. John Bosco. 13 carries for 96 yards. No TDs, but he had a 30-yarder. And then and Quincy Craig, I think, is another guy that's been very promising. Sophomore, 7 carries last week for 33 yards. And a long of 9 yards. So it could be a heavy dose of those guys because you wonder what the Mater Dei, if you sit in some of these games and wonder, well, what's Mater Dei going to look like next year? Who knows what's going to be at quarterback? But in the backfield, you're going to have a junior running back and Yetz, a sophomore running back. Yetz will be a senior next year. Craig will be a junior. Those are two really good running backs, and maybe they'll be part of the feature plan on Friday. What do you think of those backs, Scotty?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say unfortunate, but being in that offense that they play in with those receivers, you know, Mater Dei uses that offense as their running game. So with the short passing game, so sometimes, you know, the backs don't get as much carry. Plus the fact that they're not, you know, I don't want to say physical guys because they do run hard, but they, you know, you don't want to take a pounding. These guys aren't guys that are going to carry the ball 20 times a game. So, but when they do get their carries, you know, they're going to, you know, pop one here and there. They're going to get some good yardage. You know, they can, you know, I think last week they tried to get some more running in, but that was kind of tough in that, you know, those situations. But I honestly, I think that next year you're going to see more from these guys than you are right now. But these guys can go to the house anytime. Just, you know, it's just a matter of when and how and time.
Yeah. I think Mater Dei will probably want to get their offense going again. Like you said, they had a little drought at the end, or a considerable drought at the end. So they're going to probably try to maybe Bryce Young plays only the first half kind of thing. I could see some of that. Maybe Jalen Davis doesn't play because he kind of had a little ankle or something going on against Bosco. But it should be interesting to see how this game finishes out. You know, and then from a Mater Dei perspective, I mean, right now it looks like for the Monarchs, first round of playoffs after that bye, it's looking like they're going to probably play Bishop Ammont. That's what it looks like. You know, those teams have been playing a little non-league series the last couple of years, but that game faded out. But is that what you're expecting, Scotty, after the bye? It's going to be Mater Dei taking on the Lancers of Bishop Ammont?
You know, it's funny because you look at that, and I think it should be flipped. I think Calabasas should be the 8th seed, and I think Ammont should be 7. So, and that's another. It'll be interesting to see what happens if you know, how they vote these when they come down. You know, it's like, I know they're trying to use that formula, but when you kind of study, you know, those games, and I think I've seen it elsewhere. I think I've seen a couple of people talk about it, that they would flip those two as well. You know, Ammont, you know, I mean, Calabasas has all that offense, but I don't know if they have enough defense. You know, Amont's been playing, you know, heart with heart. You know, they don't have that big time offense, but they have a solid defense. But and they've won some big games. So I you know, that's just my take, because I think those two should be flipped as well. You know, and then like I said, it comes back down to, you know, to Dei-St. You know, and I think those, you could even make a case that, you know, Ammont could be ahead of, you know, Dei-St. But the way they're playing right now, because if they played those two teams right now, I think everybody would take Ammont because of where Dei-St. is at. Like I said, we'll know more as we talk, as we go down the line. But on par, that's where, you know, where it looks like right now. And it's interesting because I think Ammont and Mater Dei is an interesting matchup. I think that's more of a tougher matchup, even though I know Mater Dei is, you know, taking apart everybody. But I think if you get Bosco and Calabasas, I think Bosco just rolls them with easier than say, you know, Mater Dei and Ammont on paper. Okay. So that's just my take. So
interesting. Well, believe it or not, Scotty, next week when we get together for the Trinity League Football Podcast, we're going to be talking about the playoffs are finally here, and I can't believe it already. But next week on our show, we'll be talking about that initial draw in Division I. We won't have games to preview that week, but we'll talk about what's going to be happening in Division I, and we're going to talk about the games coming up in Division II, and we'll recap last week's Week 10 action, as we always do, recap those action. But also next week, be sure to join us back on the Trinity League Football Podcast, because we're going to have our end of the year awards as well. So that's going to be a big show. Might even have to do some different probably editing on that. Might put out a special show. And our mid-season awards were really popular. So the forewarning now is we'll probably break that award show for our postseason awards, because we did so many awards. We'll probably break it into a second show. So and then after next week, the programming note, Scotty and I will be back if. And the likelihood is pretty high, we'll be back on the Trinity League Football Podcast to preview the Mater Dei Bosco finale. So we're looking at about 2 more shows left in Scotty and I's season. So how's that all sound, Scotty?
That sounds great, Dan. You laid it all out. I was just about to ask you, how this is setup is going to be for us this year, and you laid it all out perfectly.
So I think that's what we're looking at. So, Scotty, you're going to be on Friday. I'm expecting you to probably be at the Modern Day J. Sarah Tilt, and you'll probably have some good insight for us next week.
As always, Dan. Yep, as always.
All righty. So for Scott Barajas, I'm Dan Albano, and I want to thank you for listening to us on the Trinity League Football Podcast, and we'll end our show hearing from none other than Bruce Rollinson, Modern Day football coach. Thanks, everybody.
We won our 9th game against an outstanding football team. There's a long way to go. We gotta let them enjoy this, Dan, and then we gotta get ready for J. Sarah. You know what I mean? I've done it long enough to know that there's a bigger picture in this thing.